everyone, and welcome. Good morning, good evening, good day, depending on where you're joining from. And I am excited to host this virtual conference series, Best Practices in Community Engaged Research for Work Family Scholars. My name is Marisa Young. I'm a professor of sociology at McMaster University, and I serve on the Work Family Research Network Board of Directors. And I'm delighted to kick off today's event on behalf of our leadership team, including President Jennifer Hook and our Executive Officer, Steve Sweet. I'd also like to extend a very special thanks to you, Steve, as well as our Vice Presidents, Katie Collins and Leah Rupener, for the support organizing today's session. On behalf of the WFRN, I would also like to give thanks to the sponsorship of the Population Research Institute at Penn State University, whose support helps make events like this possible. Now, before introducing our panelists, I want to acknowledge that by joining us today, you are consenting to this session being recorded. The recording will be posted on the WFRN's website for those who can't join us in person today. I also want to acknowledge that events like this are made possible by the generous support of members. And so if you are not a member yet, I encourage you to check out our website to learn more about WFRN's benefits for members. Steve just popped the link in the chat. Thank you very much. Also, please note the call for extended abstracts to the WFRN pre-conference on understanding cognitive labor and the mental load. This pre-conference will take place June 17th in Montreal. Extended abstracts are due December 1st, and this pre-conference will, of course, be followed by the 8th Biennial WFRN Conference from June 17th to the 20th, and we encourage you to register in advance for a reduced rate. Now, I would like to introduce our esteemed panelists, and knowing that each of you are going to provide a bit more background on your experiences and expertise, I'll keep your intro bio rather brief. Unfortunately, Dr. Naomi Lightman could not make it this evening, but I'm very happy to inform you that our moderator, Dr. Kim Laat, has agreed to participate in her place, and I will take over the role as moderator. Dr. Kim Laat is an assistant professor of organizations and human behavior at University of Waterloo's Stratford School of Interaction Design and Business. Dr. Laat is a trained sociologist specializing in work culture. She has extensive experience working with industry throughout her career. And originally, when I reached out to Dr. Laat to serve as moderator, I did so knowing about her extensive expertise in this area. And so I'm actually quite happy that it's worked out the way that it has, so that Kim, you can share some of your experiences with us here today. Next, we have Dr. Erin Kelly, a Sloan Distinguished Professor of Work and Organization Studies and Director of the Institute for Work and Employment Research at MIT. Dr. Kelly's research draws on partnerships with employing organizations to examine scheduling and work-family supports, family leaves, harassment policies, and strategies for encouraging employee voice in a variety of organizations and industries. Thank you very much for being here today, Erin. Next, I'd like to introduce Dr. Jenny Povey, who is a psychologist and associate professor of inclusive education and employment at the University of Queensland. Dr. Povey works closely with community, industry, and government to undertake co-developed solution-focused research to inform policy and practice. Thank you for being here today, Jenny. And last but not least, I would like to introduce Dr. Hayley Christian, who is at the Western Australian Co-Director and Chief Investigator of the Australian Research Council Centre of Excellence for Children and Families over the life course. Dr. Christian collaborates with multi-sectoral partner organizations across government, not-for-profit, and the private sector nationally and internationally to promote children's physical activity, health, and development. Welcome, Hayley. So by order of introduction, please begin. I'd like to ask each of you to please begin by sharing with us some of your experiences working with community partners in the past, including grassroots organizations, nonprofits, and industry. We're interested in hearing how you gained access, including how many organizations maybe you reached out to before securing a partnership, what that experience was like. And if you've partnered with more than one organization, please feel free to draw on those experiences too. So just a really general, open, introductory remark session. So Kim, I'll let you kick us off.
Sure, and I just want to also extend my thanks to WFRN for organizing this. I'm really glad we have a chance to come together and talk about this topic, and probably commiserate with one another too. But I've been able to partner with a range of organizations, spanning corporations, government agency, and nonprofits. And I guess I would say, at least initially, early on, the smoothest partnerships tended to occur when I was embedded in an institution that signaled a lot of legitimacy. So, for example, I had a postdoc at the Institute for Gender and the Economy, which is at the Rotman Business School at University of Toronto, and the director at the time, Sarah Kaplan, had cultivated deep ties with the business community there, and so the way I got access for my postdoc project was that a senior leader actually reached out to her saying that she was interested in gaining some insight into what was preventing women from advancing into leadership positions in IT. And so that was really helpful there. So that affiliation alone opened doors that I probably could not have opened by myself at that career stage. And that experience was fantastic. I was able to rely on their support for booking meeting rooms to conduct my interviews. And yeah, it was just, yeah, really, really helpful. And then around the same time, my colleague Lechen Liu and I also partnered with the Canada Research Council, sorry, the NRC, we call it, the National Research Council. They were interested in integrating an intersectional gender lens into some of their quantum technology programming. So this was something that had kind of come down from the higher ups. And their goal is to kind of increase funding applications from women researchers. And we really went back and forth on this one. We hesitated because we knew it would be a tremendous amount of work for something that might just be used tokenistically. We ultimately decided to do it, and our contact there was, it turns out he was actually very deeply committed, and by integrating some of our advice, they actually ended up seeing a 30% increase in women applicants for their programming. So again, that was a very positive experience as well. And I've also partnered with some nonprofits, the Canadian Live Music Association being one of them. And that partnership came through my collaborator at the time, Alana Stewart, who was a musician but has since started graduate school at Queen's University. And again, we went back and forth on that one. The CLMA is a nonprofit, and they were interested in learning about barriers that Indigenous, Black, and people of color experience accessing, and just experiences in the live music sector. So with that one, we were also very pessimistic, I guess you could say, about what the outcome would be. And so we decided to kind of draft a budget. We knew that to do the work meaningfully, it would take a lot of money, a lot of resources. So we said, okay, if you can meet these terms, this is how much money we think it's going to take. We'll partner. We'll do it with you. And they agreed. And ultimately, that worked out really well. And I'm happy to talk more about why we needed such a big budget if you want to pick up on that later. And then lastly, and I guess relevant to this crowd, I also have partnered with the Vanier Institute of the Family, which is an advocacy organization, a nonprofit here in Canada that does a lot of work on family life in Canada. And there it was more traditional academic research reporting, but also a good experience. Yeah.
Thank you very much for that overview, Kim. Erin, I'll turn it over to you to provide a bit of background about your experiences.
Sure, thank you. And thank you for organizing this, Marissa and Kim, too. So I would say I have been involved in three major partnerships with employers where I was studying their workforce and also investigating some changes in policies and practices. And I call those major because they were all 2.5 to 5 year partnerships, and they involved collecting new data both through surveys and interviews and participant observation, and also accessing some administrative data from the firm. And so you can imagine that has lots of moving parts, and as Kim said, required a significant investment. I was able to do 2 of those 3 large partnerships with funding from the Work, Family, and Health Network, which was a federally funded initiative in the US. So I have never received any kind of financial support for these research partnerships from the firm. Of course, they're committing their time and their expertise and their employees' ability to complete interviews or surveys or participate in focus groups on company time, but not directly supporting the research staff. In addition, I've been involved in, I think, about 4 smaller partnerships. 2 of those were working with PhD students to develop a partnership that they then ran with, and those were both primarily ethnographic, although we had some data, other data collection in the other site. And then 2 other ones that have just not been as extensive. I would say a key orienting framework for me is that these are research partnerships. I think that is going to be familiar to you all, but I would say working with firms or other organizations that have a mental model, a template of consulting, it's been really critical to frame it as a research partnership and even actually say those words over and over and over to try to move them off of the idea that they're defining the research scope. Of course, we need to find mutual interest, but it's not research for pay. It's not a consulting engagement, and this kind of framing of research partnership has been helpful in doing that. So in those projects, we're looking for an overlap of interests. What do we think is interesting and that the field needs to know, and what are the concerns that they have? And in this case, in my cases, it's often been either recruitment, retention, addressing turnover concerns, or some concern about employee engagement and whether people are able to really fulfill their roles in a comfortable way. I loved that Kim talked about going in and doing research that identified barriers to current practices. I think that's a wonderful model. In my case, we were always studying initiatives or changing policies or practices. So it had a more evaluation research angle to it. Now, of course, there's the whole theory story that I'm interested in, but from their perspective, it was helpful because it was, okay, we're considering or we're making a change in policy or practice. Help us understand whether it's meeting the firm's goals, addressing the employee needs, in some cases having benefits for family members or the larger community. So I think it really depends on how you're entering. Are you helping them evaluate something? Are you helping understand barriers and challenges that some part of their community is facing right now? I'll stop there for now. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Erin. I appreciate all that overview. And Jenny, I'll turn it over to you to provide a bit of background about your expertise and experience.
Yeah, hi, thanks. So, yeah, I've also had a range of partnerships, including even setting up through undergraduate courses, community partners that we link and have linked with students who do group work there, and also creating placements for our HDR students in industry sort of partnership placements projects that they need to do. But I thought today it might be useful to share an example from my parent engagement research. And that was really a partnership with PNC's Queensland. So they are parent peak body, and they are basically an NGO. They don't have much money. They don't have any money for research. So they approached us, asking us to do research with them, but they didn't have any funding. So we then really worked with them to understand what they were needing, and then try to find. Initially, we found some seed funding. We then did a survey of all state schools in Queensland. That's how a state, I guess, equivalent to a state in the States. And then we then used that data to then identify schools that were doing parent engagement really well, but they were disadvantaged schools. So you would typically expect those schools to be struggling with parent engagement. And we went in and did some case studies. I think what is the most important thing about PNC's Queensland, even though they didn't have money, what they did have was networks. So they had regular meetings with the Minister of Education. They had what they call it a PNC president in each school. So it's a parent, the key parent of the parent body within each school that was connected to the PNC. And they had a variety of other networks that they could connect us to. And those are the kinds of networks, because this happened probably about 10 years ago, the initial approach. And we worked with them for about 7 years. So probably similar to what Erin was saying, it was a long partnership. But yeah, we wouldn't have been able to gain access or maybe get that legitimacy without them working alongside us. But I think, yeah, it was the lessons I probably took from the partnership is that you don't always need money with partnerships, that you need trust and mutual benefit. I can never say the word, sorry. Yeah, and just access to those professional networks and that social capital is really important. But also, what is really important is that we design, like right from the beginning with that survey, we co-designed it. So although I wasn't embedded there, I spent a lot of time with them in their premises, working with them, finding out what they were after. I attended things like their annual conferences and things like that, just to actually become known in their networks. But that co-design really built ownership of the project together. Also, that it helped me over time build a relationship with the Department of Education that I hadn't had previously. So, and so that opened up opportunities to other projects that came out of that later. And just really working together in this way and working with these schools, it really led to impact. And I think that's really the most important thing, that like Erin, I'm already interested in changing practices. And so working with those schools and I guess, sorry, just stepping back, is that what was really interesting also is that not only were we building this partnership, but when we worked in the schools, we were actually exposed to the community partnerships they have. So the principals of schools actually developed their own community partnerships. So that was also, so it was like partnerships within partnerships. So it was quite an interesting project. Anyway, hopefully that was interesting.
Absolutely, thank you. And a few points that you mentioned, I have some follow-ups for, but we're going to turn it over to Hayley to talk a little bit about your experience and expertise.
Thanks so much for having me and being part of this panel. I've already learned lots of things listening to the other panelists. Probably just to start from our perspective and the Life Course Centre here in Australia, how we define, we set up for the first time a knowledge transfer portfolio. Don't hold me to the word knowledge transfer. I would have called it other things, but that's what we wrote in the grant, so we had to keep with it. But we set out that for our very multidisciplinary kind of many background and stages of career centre with, what are we like, nearly maybe 300 members, what does, you know, stakeholder engagement or community partnership mean? So we defined for this panel community members being the community, so community engagement, the people we're trying to work with that have the lived experience. But we also then defined other stakeholders, generally being either government or non-government. And, you know, the non-government can be the NGOs, the not-for-profits, but it also can be the for-profit industry. So that's kind of where I'm coming from, and I'll talk more broadly about that. And also, just don't hold it against me, but I am a public health researcher, so I'm kind of looking at more maybe from the health and medicine perspective. So just currently, actually I'll start originally. So I was very fortunate, my own PhD and postdoc training, to have an industry co-funded scholarship. So my training was always to work with partners from day one. And I would say that partnering and partnerships and community engagement is what we do every day. It's not kind of, you know, here or there in a project. And I'll come back to this in a moment. So that was how I was trained. Maybe that means I don't find it as daunting as others might when you come in a bit later. We did an early career researcher panel yesterday, so I was talking to all of them about these kinds of things, which was lots of fun. But I think we are also driven by our funding organisations. So I'll take, for example, one of our state-based health promotion funding agencies. They have in their funding applications, from as long as I can remember, always had a partner section. You are required to list the partners that you're engaging with. There needs to be evidence of that, and also the planned engagement with the proposed project you're asking funding for. You also, over time, need to, it's evolved, you now need to provide pretty concrete letters of support, and that can vary a little bit. And quite often now we're seeing, I sit on the committee, research committee, so I know what applications are coming in. Quite often we'll see the partners and stakeholders part of the research group. So they're not listed separate in the partners section. They are, one or two of them are actually listed as investigators, and they may be just associate investigators, but they're firmly in the team. Another example would be from a national perspective in Australia. Both the Australian Research Council and the National Health and Medical Research Council have types of grants where you go in, you have some cash, doesn't have to be a lot, but definitely a lot of in-kind, and the government will match that funding. So I was very fortunate, again, kind of early postdoc, to get a National Health and Medical Research Council partnership grant. So I feel like I was thrown in the deep end. I'll come back to this, but a lot of it was about timing, that you had to get a minimum of Australian dollars, 150,000, to kind of then, you know, maybe an extra 300 that you make up out of in-kind, to then you get the 400 you'd like from the National Health and Medical Research Council. So I suppose in terms of, you know, how do we do research, how do we get funded, I think a lot of the partner engagement is embedded in our funding processes. What it looks like for me now, because of some of those grants that we actually try and combine them, so we don't like to burden our partners. We'd be working with probably somewhere between 15 and 20 not-for-profits. We work very much in the early childhood education and care sector. So that in Australia is very much for-profit. Stock exchange, money-making, you might have seen it in the world news. We've had a few issues in our childcare sector in Australia of late, but also a very big not-for-profit provider as well. We work with government departments. I work across health, transport, environment, planning, and we sit down as a group, partner advisory group, every single month, and they are engaged. They're at the table. They're problem solving the research with us. We've also just recently, we did this a few years ago, and actually tomorrow I get to work on my Saturday. That's okay. We do a research priority setting activities. So we survey all our kind of community. For us, it's parents and carers with children under 10, and we reach out to all of our stakeholders. And we ask them to tell us what they think are research priorities. The key thing here is research. Where could research help in terms of, for example, young children's health and development? We take that data in, we spend a lot of time qualitatively analysing it and theming it, and come up with a number of research priorities. We go back to the community separately and back to the stakeholders and ask them to prioritise those research priorities. And then the third step, which is tomorrow, is we then sit down with community, and then we'll sit down with the other partners, stakeholders, and really kind of get some consensus on what, I mean, it can vary, but we sort of start with top 10 research priorities. And that, when we did it several years ago, really helped us get these partnership type grants and funding, and meant that we were doing research that was driven by need by the community or partners and stakeholders. So we're really looking forward to where this goes tomorrow in the next few weeks, because we believe it will really set us up as a research team of where we should be focusing our research. And that means we have their engagement throughout the research process going forwards. Just looking at my notes and see if there's anything else. I'd probably say that also our partnerships have been reciprocal. It's not as easy as an early career researcher, but in the sense that they will come to us as evidence partners to get information. And that's outside of all their commitments to our existing projects. But we always make ourselves very available when they say, you know, what's the go on, I don't know, the latest evidence on dealing with social emotional regulation in, in little ones. We obviously do lots of presentations whenever they ask. You know, obviously we volunteer because we want to share the work and translate it. But we also now, as the team's growing, you know, we can sit on their advisory boards and their groups. It's a very much more of a reciprocal relationship where they're helping advising on our research, but we're helping advising on other related things that are relevant outside the kind of existing commitment. And the only other thing I'd say is in terms of community and partnerships is, yeah, it takes time. We've already had that. I think the benefits outweigh any of the costs. And for me personally, and I think that's what I've tried to do with my team as well, is yes, it's hard work, but I think the returns, and if you're really wanting to have, you know, to translate your research and have that impact, I think it's so integral. And I love it. It's probably one of the, apart from training, you know, our next generation of researchers, the stakeholder and partner and community engagement is, yeah, I think the really fun part of what we do. So I'll finish there. Thank you.
Thank you, Hayley. Well, and it does sound as though, yeah, your research can be and is often defined by the community needs, but recognizing with some of the other panelists, as you had mentioned, with the mutual beneficial gains, sometimes the autonomy of the research design may not fit directly with the organization's needs or wants. And I'm wondering if any of you have experienced challenges in safeguarding that autonomy over your research design while trying to balance it with organization or alongside organizational partners' wants, needs, and resources. So I'll open it up, but maybe to if Kim, you want to speak to this at all, if you've had experiences of that.
I've been fortunate that I haven't received a lot of pushback. Again, it varies from case to case, but so for example, in the case of like the big multinational corporation, there was a non-disclosure agreement process that took like 6 months. And so there was plenty of time to build the importance of research independence into the NDA. And specifying outright that the organization could not actually have a say over my sample design. Again, it speaks to what Erin was saying about ensuring that there are interests that dovetail with theirs, but having clear boundaries between what your research is and your research agenda and essentially what you're willing to share with them or provide to them. So yeah, it's been relatively clear cut in that case. You know, I feel like most folks are reasonable and they respect clear boundaries when, you know, when they're stated upfront, right? Interestingly, the organization I'm working with now, and we can get to this later, but they didn't even ask to see my interview guide, or they were very happy to be hands off. So really you know, that fight for autonomy should be clarified, or, you know, you can win it well before the data has been collected is kind of the best way to go about it.
Yeah,
I'll jump in here and share a little bit. I agree with Kim. It's part of developing the partnership. And I think the reason that it maybe is less often fought over is because it is the reason that many people walk away. So you had asked early on, how many people did you talk to for the partnerships? Kind of like Kim said, and then also Jenny said, it kind of builds over time. So I think in 2000, I did an interview that led me to be invited to a group of managers who were interested in work life and issues in 2002. And then that led to the first partnership that then led to the other, and those kinds of things. But beyond that kind of natural flow, I've had countless conversations where we had one or two calls and then it just dropped, right? And so I think that those drops come because people realize that, oh, yes, this would help answer the question that I want, but they're really serious about how they're going to approach this. And I'm going to have to bring some people along or explain to them why it needs to be done this way. So it doesn't feel like a tussle. It feels like the partners deciding it may not work out on their end. The one time that Phyllis Sloan and I had invested months and months into a partnership, and then at the last minute, like really a week before we launched data collection, some executive saw the survey and said, you can't ask about gender or race. And we said, we can't do this research without knowing that. And we had to walk away. So that was the one time that really felt like it was a late blossoming issue. And I think we just had to set the line there, because the research would not have been valuable to the scholarly community if we had given in on that.
Wow, that's very disheartening.
Other
Yeah.
times.
And that does get to my next question about the very honest challenges of doing some of this research. But before moving to that, Jenny, I just wanted to give you an opportunity to chime in here if you've had any situations where you ran into conflicts between sort of the goals of the research versus the organizations or nonprofits' goals alongside.
Not so much that, but I guess just in terms of IP sometimes. So we were really unfortunate with this parent engagement research. The second phase where we went into the schools was funded by the Department of Education through like a grant system that you applied for the grant funding from them. And at that particular point, they didn't put in IP, but we were the first round that had got 3 years of funding. After that, they started putting IP. So in other words, you couldn't publish anything and without going through them first. So luckily I missed that. But that comes, in a lot of the partnerships that I work in, if there's money coming, especially from government, you really need to have those negotiations right up front when you've brought the contract about IP. And we put in publication protocols and things like that, but have those conversations early. Don't wait till the end of the relationship, and then it's harder to have those conversations, especially because we see in government partnerships, people rotate a lot. And so you lose those contacts that you had, and you might have had a good relationship in the beginning, and then new people, and then, just things change.
Thank you very much. Well, and that again does touch on the question I provided you all asking. Can you provide a truly honest reflection of the challenges you faced in community-based research, and whether this be securing partnerships, maintaining those relationships, or managing different perspectives or expectations? And so, of course, you've noted a few of these, but I'd love to hear additional examples. And I bring this question up because multiple times I brought students to presentations on community engaged research, and they end up seeing kind of the final result and the outcome, and all of the messiness and the journey to get there doesn't get discussed, I think, as thoroughly as it otherwise could and should. And so my students often think, well, this is really easy, let's just go and start engaging with particularly nonprofit organizations, and there's just so many hoops to go through. So I'd love for you to share your reflections on that with the industries, organizations, and nonprofits you've worked with. And so, Hayley, maybe I'll turn it back to you to talk a little bit about that.
Sure. Thanks, Marisa. I think that was a really good example. I think over time, we've tried to not think of partnerships because you invest so much in them, right? And as Jenny highlighted, you know, people move on. So I think there's one element is the challenge of getting the right partners on board for a particular project, keeping them engaged. And I have some thoughts on that. But we have been able to take a bit more of a glass half full approach to, you know, when a representative from an organisation or a partner moves on, right? That happens all the time. And some of these projects, you know, they drag out for a bit. And we've generally, if we've invested and done, we feel like we've done the right thing in establishing that good relationship with that individual representing that organisation. For the most part, not always, but for the most part, they will move to a new government department and we pick up a new partner, right? They still would love to stay involved. I had a partner who was at our West Australian Department of Health. Their husband, family, had to move to Geneva. He got a job over there doing something. And of course, she's like, well, Geneva, I should be getting some work here at the World Health Organization. Hayley, do you happen to know? I was like, no, but something had happened and there was a contact there. And I said, just reach out. They might have some work. Well, she's now our representative from the WHO, right? From a little state government health department too. So, and she comes back to Perth to see family every year to Western Australia and we catch up. So there's a really, you'd ask for challenges, but I'm trying to give you the glass half full here. And the other thing is we have a really, it's not a formal process, but when we hear about partners that are moving on, we really invest a lot of time with them to say who's taking over and that they do a handover to the new representative. And my job always, and yes, it's time consuming, so I'll throw one of the biggest challenges here is the time factor, but I will make sure before we have the next project, you know, partner meeting, advisory group meeting, that I will meet one-on-one with that new representative to bring them up to speed, to build that rapport and build that relationship. So I think in terms of, you know, challenges, it's really about the time to, you know, keep those current partners engaged and, you know, re-engaging with them. Coming back to, I think another related bit for the previous question is around, you know, expectations and sorting these things out front. I think there was maybe a comment there around, you know, we have agreements. And we have letters of support, which says this is what your in-kind contribution looks like. So when I see a partner kind of dropping off in terms of their engagement, or the new ones come in, but they're not sure or what have you, I will always send them the letter of support that came from their organisation. So they clearly get a 1 or 2 page about what is it they've said they'd commit to. And yeah, spend all the time kind of building that relationship with to get them on board and really understand from that individual representative what they're really interested in. Like they're there to represent the priorities of their organisation. They can see in the letter of support why they've committed, but what really drives that individual to know how they might engage and different forms of engagement. So yes, there's lots of people that rock up to our monthly partner advisory group. That's wonderful. But there's others that don't like that. So I have a sweet spot where I meet them for coffee, you know, or it's a bit more ad hoc. So really understanding sometimes that not everyone fits that same mold of wanting to jump on an online meeting and, you know, go through a few PowerPoint slides. So that's a challenge, but I think doing all of that all the time and keeping on top of it and investing in relationships and building that, you know, that trust and that mutual respect.
Time, right? Exactly. Zero sum. But yes, I would agree. That's something that too is not, you know, it's not always a luxury and isn't always recognized, the demands that are placed on it when you're trying to build these relationships by your own institution, or, you know, if you're on a tenure track or something, right? How much time that does take before you actually can do the research. Kim, I'll turn it over to you to share your reflections on some of these honest challenges.
Yeah, so my biggest challenge of late had been gaining access to conduct a study on the relationship between hybrid working and the mental load people are carrying, both in terms of their paid work and all their unpaid household responsibilities. Kind of picking up on what I'd learned about the value of institutional legitimacy when I was a postdoc. I thought, okay, before I even apply for my grant, I'm going to reach out to my Office of Research you know, uh, Waterloo kind of fancies itself the MIT of the North, and so they have a lot of connections with the tech industry. And I thought, okay, who better to help me put the feelers out there? And boy, did they try. Um, Two separate times I had organizations commit only to pull out months after the fact. And that just speaks to the climate we're in about the return to office mandates and organizations just not obviously wanting to learn anything about how people feel about those mandates. So it's been particularly challenging to be studying flexible work arrangements in this climate. So, so yeah, I started, it's taken me the better part of 2 years to secure a partnership. And ultimately, I ended up just reaching out to my own personal networks after, feeling so desperate. So family get-togethers, random acquaintances, people I hadn't spoken to in a decade, pinging them on LinkedIn, hey, that kind of thing. And, as luck would have it, I eventually did secure a partnership with an organization. And again, it speaks to the role of timing. They were also rejigging their return to office policy, but they wanted some insights into how it would play out. But another challenge was that right as they agreed to the study was when it was a month before they were going to change their policy. And so it was not a good time for me to start my study because I didn't want these folks, these employees that I spoke to, thinking that my research was influencing their new policy. So we decided to wait until 6 months after the policy had gone into effect, and so that's kind of where I'm at now, collecting data. But yeah, it's been really challenging, and so yes, institutional legitimacy can help at sometimes, but other times it's just following up on every single lead that you have that is eventually going to get you in the door.
Yeah, and sometimes relying on those personal networks, right? Erin, so you mentioned a couple challenges you ran into with Phyllis and some of the work you've done, but can you elaborate maybe on some other examples?
Well, I want to tie into Hayley's point. I feel like I could learn on her partner relationships. I would say the most challenging thing for me has been turnover in the key contacts. And I think it perhaps particularly because that happens in firms and it happens with other leadership changes, it feels like no matter what the agreement, I agree, all of those strategies are smart for sharing, but no matter what the agreement, if there's a new boss in town, right, or there's a shift in the kind of HR orientation, then it can be really, really hard to keep a healthy partnership. My team has been able to continue by reminding people this is the agreement that the organization made. But it can shift from a genuine, enthusiastic interest to almost pulling teeth to hear back from even key contacts or to get access to field sites or to gather, get updates on data collection in some sense. I'm also going to borrow from Hayley on the positive, turning the glass half full, where the partnerships have been genuine and enthusiastic. It's been so much fun, and people have said, this is the most meaningful thing I've gotten to do in my career, is to learn from this and be able to inform our decisions better. And one tip that I will mention is it takes a lot of luck in that matchmaking, but you kind of feel it when they have the genuine interest. And if I think back to the places where we had like 5-year partnerships, there was somebody who wanted to be a social scientist who was a key gatekeeper. And, you know, they are genuinely interested in the same questions we're interested in. Now, maybe they don't foreground the gender inequality or the implications for this or that, you know, but the broad question of how can this workplace be a healthy and supportive place as well as a high performing place was one that really grabbed them. And so when you find that, it's a good sign for an effective partnership.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And it also, I think, makes it so that the organization or members of it are less wary of a researcher coming in, right? Because you do have that advocate. Thank you very much, Jenny. I'll turn it over to you to share your thoughts about different challenges or your really honest experiences of challenges and some of the work you've done.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think of some more challenges that haven't been covered already. I guess thinking about Hayley mentioned some of the grants that we have, and one of the grants that I've got is an ARC linkage, and with that we've got 11 industry partners, and most of them are NGOs, and so it's trying to, and they were meant to be helping us with data collection, but then they're also we were looking at the outcomes for young people who were in out-of-home care, and half of them are Indigenous. So in Australia, we have our Indigenous population is probably about 6%, but in out-of-home care, it's close to 40%. So they're really overrepresented. So, so some of the challenges was really trying to find Indigenous workers researchers to work on the project for support. Also we had a subcommittee for those partners, but then also having an Indigenous representative on from each organisation. So I think probably that was quite challenging, given that it's a small community. They're overdrawn on. You know what I mean? Everyone wants to add an Indigenous researcher to their project team, so there's a lot of burden placed on them. So yeah, so I think that was probably a bit challenging for me.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes a lot of sense. And I think, with then those points in mind, and you've probably touched on a few of these as well, I'll ask you to open up about some of the less obvious considerations that maybe you can share with those of us looking to pursue research partnerships with non-academic entities like community organizations. So, for example, I mean, we've already talked about the time it takes to secure partnerships, but maybe talking about the timing of making those requests or other lessons that you've learned that you don't think would be obvious in a community best practices for community engagement course if it was taught to the next generation, for example. And maybe we'll just switch up the order of start. And Hayley, I'll have you start with this question.
Yeah, I'm not sure I have anything more to add. Maybe just a couple of tiny tips to say, I mean, I don't know if this is less obvious, but it's as simple as having a coffee. It's that face-to-face. Don't underestimate the value in the lead-in time. So, that building of that relationship before, for example, you need the letter of support for the funding application. So that big lead-in time. We've already talked about this, really clear expectations of what we're asking them. We're right in the moment of, we've got a big national funding scheme at the moment that's about to close, and I've been asked to find some West Australian partners, and these are all partners I work with already. So it's, that relationship's already there, but straight away their question is, and I'm prepared when I go into the meetings, but so what do you require of us if we commit here? What do we need to do? Is it meetings? Is it helping to recruit participants, whatever? So really clear on what they have to do or what we're asking them to do, and making sure we, in our own words, know their organisational priorities, so we can then explain where this project or this funding application will align with their priorities. And also being really clear about when that is. So a lot of our national funding schemes it's ridiculous. I'm sure you guys are the same, but you put the application in, you don't realistically actually start the work until sometimes 2 years later. By the time it's gone through its review, you're done on your multi-institutional agreements and all that. So sometimes I've been able to get partners across the line because I'm not talking about now. Like, this is, you know, are you interested in this? This is what we're looking at. Do you think this is feasible? They've also come back and said, no, we can't partner because we don't know in 2 years' time where we're at. So we can't provide you with a letter of support right now because we don't know if we can commit in 2 years' time. So, and then the only other thing is when you're looking for cash contributions, just know your organisation. I hate talking about money, full stop, but, you know, chat to them, ask about their funding cycle. I got a really lucky, you know, foot in the door with my first kind of big National Health and Medical Research Council partnership grant. And I was speaking to one of the government departments just to sound them out about it. And they said, actually, it's nearly end of financial year. We've got $20,000. We've got to clear. This is perfect. And I said, but we might not know if we get the grant till later. He goes, don't know, doesn't matter. I'll give it to you. You just hold it in some space. And then if, you know, you don't get the grant, you'll have to return it. So just, yeah, I mean, that was a really nice lesson learned early on in my career. I'll stop there. Thank you.
I think those are, yeah, very good points. And I know, just to chime in here, sometimes we've faced resistance when coming to organizations around the timing of grant writing, because I think so many may have been used by previous researchers, and there's not been that knowledge translation or dissemination to those, you know, back to the communities in the way that it should be. And so instead, you know, focusing on the timing of grants really is the wrong way to approach some groups, but does work in other ways, right? So yeah, thank you very much for that. Kim, I wonder if you wouldn't mind chiming in and talk about some less obvious considerations that you would share with the next generation of researchers about community engaged research.
I don't know if this is less obvious per se, but just recognizing the limits to your own standpoint, and recognizing the need to communicate really effectively across many lines of difference. Different organizations have their own kind of shorthand and way of speaking, and you have to adapt to that very quickly sometimes to make your point. Like in one of my projects, in one of my collaborations, there was another partnership with a firm that was collecting statistical data, and they weren't planning on desegregating the data. And so obviously everyone in this room, we know the importance of desegregating your data, especially when you're looking to apply an intersectional lens. But we had to figure out a way to communicate the importance of that and to kind of advocate for bringing yet another partnership on board, someone who could successfully kind of usher in that aspect of the research. So yeah. The nice thing also about being a qualitative interviewer is that you can ask really naive, dumb questions. So, what do you mean by that term? And in a way that you couldn't maybe get away with in other type of occupational settings, right? You're supposed to just know certain things, but we can be kind of naive and ask all those dumb questions to kind of speed up the learning process. Yeah, I'll stop there for now.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point. Ask the dumb questions about the definitions of certain terms. Thank you. Jenny, I'll turn it to you to talk about any less obvious considerations that you might have to share.
Well, I guess one of the things that as I've been working with communities and listening to them, just reflecting on that some communities feel like researchers are quite extractive. And so it links to the point where you're saying we don't often remember to go back and give those, you know, tell them the results of the findings and things like that, and take the extra step. But I think even more than that, often, especially our First Nations communities, feel that or even like even if we give that back, we're still taking from them. We're not co-authoring with them. So we might do a lot of co-design in the beginning, but we're not doing it throughout the process, and especially at the end. And so they see it as researchers just kind of taking their own, you know, I did it and I get all the glory, but it's at their expense, if that makes sense. So I think one of the things that I've been working on, so I've been working with a youth advisory group or oversight group of young people who've transitioned from care. And so what we've done is we've put in specific workshops with them right from the beginning to the end. And so at the end, we brought the findings to them. They helped us then package what are the key messages they want to send back to government, and then what are the key actions they want government to take. And then we've put them on as co-authors of that publication. So I think just thinking around those kinds of things too.
Yeah. Yeah, those are very important points. And again, just reiterating that mutual beneficial relationship that really has to be secured and fostered. Absolutely. Erin, I'll turn it to you. Do you have anything to add in terms of sort of considerations that maybe might be a little less obvious?
Sure. I mean, I think these were great. Thinking again about corporate partners and, the closest partner being often an HR manager or another executive. I think there's a funny thing where it can be 6 months to get to the agreement, and then you do the data collection, and then they want to know what you found, right? So one insight is you have to be ready to share something before you're ready to share for real, and kind of be sure that people feel that it wasn't a black hole that the team disappeared into for 2 years before they heard anything. So figuring out how can we have an initial briefing that is not overcommitting, but share some information. How can we get back to the frontline employees ideally and share something with them, but even if it's going to unfold over time. One little tip that a collaborator taught me was just your briefing, your slide, you got to have, sorry, lowered. You have to have your main point as the heading of the slide. I think in public health, you're taught that explicitly. In sociology or organizational research, you may not be taught that. And so you've got either some great quotes or a chart that you think tells the story, but people have very different experiences, like working with data of different kinds, and the punchline needs to be right there across the top. That's one very pragmatic thing I've learned. The other thing is just to respect those when there are real boundaries for your partners, learn from them. For us, one of the hardest realities was all of the contract workers have to be excluded from the study. Not because we don't care about the experiences of people doing precarious work or contingent work, but because the firm's legal relationship, if they incorporate them into the study, they are signaling that they are an employer of record and putting themselves at risk of a misclassification claim. And so if you're going to study those folks, you got to do it a different way, and you can't fold it into that organizational partnership. Those are just two little things that came to mind.
And very, very helpful tips, I think. And again, things you wouldn't think about, especially the slides. I'm gonna make sure I write that down. And I think I'm going to ask a question that deviates from what I had provided to you, because I'm really curious about it, but it does relate to this idea of fostering trust and reciprocity between organizations and researchers. But going back to Hayley, your point about time, we can't do all of this. And so oftentimes we have a team, right, that we're working with. And so that can include also students or other faculty or colleagues. And I'm wondering, how do you foster that trust with other people on your team when that connection's been made with you initially, right? So if you are bringing students on board, how do you get the organizations to trust the students as much as they do you, or if it's other colleagues? I'm just wondering if anyone has insights or if you have experiences around that. And so I'll open it up to whoever wants to maybe start or has experiences like that.
I'm happy to say a couple of things off the top of my head. So I'd say through our formal partner advisory group meetings, those team members and students are all present. I might be chairing the meeting, but they're, talking to specific sections, so they're being seen and heard as experts. Quite often something will come up with a partner suggestion, and I will then say, partner X, would you be happy to follow that up with so-and-so in the team? So kind of connecting them directly. I think my own training I try to do with my students is that they have a partner, a policy or practice relevant partner that they update, maybe once or twice a year, depends on the length of the project, with their results. So kind of helping them, that e-introduction and knowing that that's an important partner. So they manage that whole relationship as part of their PhD. I do shadowing. So if I am going to meet a VIP and start to establish that relationship, I'll say, look, would you mind if I bring along one of my students or a postdoc? So that informal aspect. And the only other thing I'd say, at least from the community involvement or consumer engagement, is that in Australia, in our Life Course Centre, we have fantastic training programs on that. And so we will formally, so we've got this workshop we're having with parents and carers tomorrow. I've made sure with some new team members that they've all done that training. So there is options obviously for kind of stakeholder training, but we have some very, very good consumer and community involvement training that, it provides that more formal pathway.
That's very helpful. Thank you. Others? Kim, Erin?
Those are great suggestions. Again, I mean, I think sometimes it feels silly to have 2 people on their side and 5 people on ours, but we'll show up with 5 because, it's a PhD student and a faculty collaborator and somebody else, and that can work. And then in the larger projects, I've needed to hire a project manager who's often either a pre-doc heading into a PhD program or sometimes a postdoc. And that that person becomes a really key contact. And so you need to hire them for excellent and flexible interpersonal skills. And you need to work with them very closely so they know what to bring you in on and what to handle themselves. And, I would say we generally err on the side of transparency with the PIs or co-PIs kind of involved in any email exchanges or invited to any meetings at all.
That's very helpful. Thank you. Kim or Jenny, any thoughts on this?
I don't have anything else to add. They're all great and similar. We do similar things. So yeah.
Yeah, same. Just making sure everyone's included in meetings would be my big thing. Yeah.
Yeah. Wonderful. Thank you. So keeping an eye on the time, I think I will then just skip to open it up to each of you to provide any final points of advice that you would offer to those looking to partner with various organizations. Anything that maybe the questions I've asked so far didn't capture, or points that you thought of along the way. And Jenny, maybe I'll start with you.
I don't have anything, sorry.
No, that's okay. That's
I
okay.
think we've covered everything, sorry.
No problem at all. Hayley, do you have any points that you'd like to share with us in closing?
Not necessarily to add anything, but maybe just to emphasize, and again, personally, from my perspective, and what I try kind of instilling in our team is that, there's always a cost to something. And, it's not always a comfortable zone to go out and put yourself out there and learn the language of another organization and teach them what research lingo is. But I just truly believe, and I've been so fortunate to have that training all the way through, that the benefits far outweigh the costs, and I think in both directions. So I just emphasize that.
I think that's really important to remember, because it does take a lot of work. And sometimes if you're not receiving that support, so sometimes in sociology, in my discipline, a lot of people, they tend to work in their silos and they're not supported from their departments or institutions to reach out. And so it's really important to emphasize those benefits, certainly. Kim, any final points of consideration?
Yeah, sure. I guess, I mean, especially for early career researchers, it's always going to take longer than you think. Even when an organization is interested in your study, they're going to be beholden to their own structural constraints. So timing really does play into it. So look early, look often for partners. Have a one pager ready to go. Have your elevator pitch ready to go in terms of what your study is all about. If you think you're going to be at a function, have that rehearsed before you go out into potential networking situations. Yeah.
Yeah, very good points. Erin, I'll turn it to you for last comments.
This is great. I think I would reiterate this frame of research partnership and just how wonderful it is when it does go well to have a chance to really learn about people's different perspectives, the challenges, and also their vision, and to help, sometimes to have the opportunity to help people who face many different constraints see new possibilities or imagine that things could be better. That's really a joy. On Kim's point about how much time it takes, I think it is a challenging thing to do as pursue as a graduate student, or when one is on the tenure track, if that is part of your career path. One thing that I have done is just have a mental test, a mental threshold of, if I got in here and was able to do one survey or 3 focus groups or something that I see as just really the initial piece, would I still learn something? Or, to put it the other way, if the firm is acquired, which has happened in my studies, or, the whole executive team is thrown out and we're kicked out at any point, will we have learned something from what we've been able to do? And then, really pursue the partnerships, potential partnerships where it feels like, hey, there's something to learn, even if it doesn't unfold the way I'm dreaming it will.
Yeah, I think those are excellent points to keep in mind and reflect upon. Okay, we do have a bit of time for questions, and I saw that a few people had to leave us, and so I wanted to make sure that we made time for questions before others might have to tend to other obligations. So I will open it up to those who are here. I do have many more questions, so I could definitely fill the time, but you've heard a lot from me. Steve, please take it away.
Hey, thank you all so much for your presentations. And I want to say what you do is so incredibly hard. I've had the good fortune to be involved in a number of studies that have related to what you do. I do have 2 questions that are very relevant to my work. One is, how do you make that initial contact, right? The nature of the email you send or the initial conversation, so that you present yourself effectively so that you invite another meeting. And then I'm interested in how you orchestrate that subsequent meeting, right? Would it be a Zoom meeting? Would you try and like arrange a coffee somewhere or what have you? Just so that relationship gets established. And that's one of the challenges that I've experienced. And I would benefit from your guidance on that.
So much, Steve. I'll open it up to our panelists. I know, Hayley, you had mentioned before, sometimes the coffee is really important, right? And so, even just having that initial one-on-one. But maybe if others have comments or.
My experience has been people when it comes to emails, shorter is better. So even though you might be tempted to go into a lot of detail about your study, the benefits of a partnership, just keep it as brief as possible until you can get an in-person or a Zoom meeting scheduled where you can kind of elaborate. So keep your ask, front and center, and just keep it short and sweet, would be the initial email, and then plenty of opportunity to elaborate when you meet for the first time in person or online.
I'd agree with that. And I would say I'm not even sure I usually have a study in mind. Like, a study versus a meeting to hear what are the concerns that are top of mind for you? What are the challenges that you're facing? And kind of framing it that broadly. To some extent, it means an email. You may not want to send an email. You may want to look for some opportunity where you're crossing paths, or show up at the places where they talk, where whomever the stakeholder is talks about those issues with their peers, if possible.
Yeah, I was going to say something similar to that, and just thinking about that relationship being front before you go and ask for something. Actually, thinking about building that relationship first, and that part of that is asking what's important to them, and also looking for opportunities. So if you know something's important for them, even if facilitating things, even if it might not be directly to your benefit, also shows that relationship. So if you have an opportunity to connect them with someone else or find some funding for them that you may not get something out of it, also shows that the relationship's important. It's not just about what you're trying to get out of it.
I'd also say that the ask in that initial email is just to, get to know each other, or get to know what each other does, and to see if there's potential collaborative opportunities. And then when the meeting occurs, my number one thing to add to this is also to understand that organisation, like just what is the government, how does that organisation work? And then kind of understand what the issues are, because that really guides what could be possible or not. Yeah.
And I don't have nearly as much experience as our panelists, but I know one of the resources we have at our university is, at least when you're looking to work with nonprofit organizations or something alike. We have the Office of Community Engagement. We also have a community research platform that's been established. And so they try to do the foundational work to create those relationships so that you're not doing a cold call. So sometimes there's different entities at your institution that, you can go to them and sort of say, hey, I'm looking to partner with such and such an organization, and they can kind of help to break the ice for you. Because I imagine, there are a lot of emails that maybe sometimes these busy people get, and you do want to maybe have already that connection or network, or like Kim, you mentioned reaching out on LinkedIn and others just to see if you can get some of those responses. Thank you for those questions. Other questions? So I have a question for Jenny, just given the organizations you work with, which tend to be nonprofit. There's not a lot of funding, and sometimes I feel like those people's time, it's so valuable, and it's so important to recognize that. And I guess it's if you had any strategies for, again, helping to convince them, of the benefits of partnering or something, because I do feel when we're working with the Canadian Mental Health Association here, or we tend to work with the libraries as well, and just nobody has time. And so to really try to give them those reasons of like, hey, this is worthwhile, we tend to struggle with. And so I wondered if you have any points or suggestions when you're dealing with organizations that have very limited time, very limited resources, and you're asking for more from them.
Yeah. So I think important is not to be asking for money from them when they don't have money, but looking for opportunities where you can leverage money from other places to then build on what they need. So that I think that, and then getting an in-kind contribution comes more naturally, because they're also getting some benefit out of it. So I think it comes back to, again, looking at what they want to get out of it and making sure they get benefit too. It's not just one way. So I think that's probably the best I can say.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think that is helpful. Yeah, never ask for money, but definitely even just the in-kind contributions.
Yeah.
Um, other questions from our audience members? Okay, I'm just going to pivot, Kim. I have one more question for you, if you don't mind. Just knowing that you are on a tenure track and that sometimes with this research, how much time it takes, I'm wondering if you could share any insights or maybe even experiences from your university or others you've been a part of the almost like the institutional culture around celebrating this type of work, or do you have to kind of push back against this traditional model of outputs and knowledge mobilization in forms of publications and conference presentations, knowing that when you're working in this line of work, it takes a little bit longer to get those outputs, and there's other knowledge, I think, mobilized efforts that should be valued in terms of reports, for example. Just any insights that you have about your experiences.
Sorry, so the question is about how to advocate for the value of types of output that is not like the traditional peer reviewed.
Yeah, or if you've had any struggles with that from your institution, I'll just say from, McMaster, sometimes there isn't as much value in the time that we put into this community engaged research efforts because there's a model of, just published based on kind of traditional research methods, community surveys, traditional interview data. So just wondering if, yeah, and if not, I completely understand, but I guess it's just, sometimes community engaged research hasn't been celebrated as much in the upper echelons of universities as much as it has been, I think, on the ground.
Yeah, I mean, sure. I'm sure on my annual performance review, it's not thought of as highly as a peer-reviewed publication would be. But I think like any of us, we do this work because that's part of what makes the job meaningful. And I know that's such a hokey response, but like it that's kind of what fuels the joy for the other forms of peer review stuff. And obviously there's a calculation involved. You're making sure that you're hitting the other metrics and you have enough peer-reviewed stuff to submit alongside the policy stuff. But it's those relationships. And you know what I love also about partnerships is when there's a publication, there's usually some kind of celebration of it, that truly brings the community together, the release of a policy report or something like that. And so in a way that the meaning you derive from that, it almost kind of trumps, for me at least, trumps any concerns I have about the optics. I also have a really supportive director and faculty, so they personally see the value in that, even though they might worry that others in the institution might not see the value in that. So yeah, there's always those considerations, but if you're not doing what you find meaningful first and foremost, then the rest of it is going to be really hard. So yeah. Sorry.
I appreciate that. That's a great comment. Erin?
Well, just to jump in, I mean, I think when Hayley was describing kind of both the public health and the Australian funding streams that require these partnerships or that center these partnerships, it helped me see, what are the institutional structures and incentives that push people towards this or make it harder for people to pursue this. And I think it's an important insight that, if we wanted to, if there could be different ways of making this an expectation and not a crazy path that you may or may not be willing to take.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe we in our organizations and our departments can try to signal that as much as possible as well.
Absolutely. Yes. Very good points. Thank you very much. I do see, Melissa, you've left a comment in the chat, and I think that this is a good one to end on. She says, "You are amazing. Your work partnering with the community is so vital and so impressive. And for those of us not likely to do it, please know how well appreciated you are." I would second that. And so thank you very much. I think if there are no further questions, we'll just take a moment to thank our panelists for taking the time in the early morning, the late evening to join us. We've learned a lot. Our turnout was not exactly what we thought, but this has been recorded and I know will be a great resource for people learning to do community engaged research. So thank you very much. And I hope you all have a wonderful night. Thank you.
Thank
you.
Thanks for organizing.
Thanks, Marisa. Bye,
Thank
everyone.
you.